Good morning, everyone. We are excited to be here. The team is all over the United States today. I'm in Rancho Santa Margarita. I believe Joyce is also in Rancho Santa Margarita. Matt, where are you right now?
I'm in beautiful Las Cruces, New Mexico, Chris. Thank you for asking.
Okay. Your hair looks fabulous.
You'll have to Google that later.
And Joanna, where are you joining us from?
I am at the Vortex, which is Sedona, Arizona, and it is the desert, and it snowed yesterday, so I feel like anything's possible.
Well, I'm in Rancho Santa Margarita. I'm wearing my Gru outfit, as you could tell. It's a little chilly. I've acclimatized from living in New Jersey. All right, so this morning we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is taking 100% responsibility. So here we go. Let me give you a little slides to get this thing going. So 3 pillars of success. If you remember what we had spoken about before, we said decide what you want, take action, and number 3 was take 100% responsibility. And this is really one of the core pieces of the things that we're teaching you. And we're going to tell you some of the strategies around how to take 100% responsibility. So take 100% responsibility for your life and your results. This is a topic that once I I pinned Joanna as the speaker. Hang on. Once I understood this concept and really started living it, it completely changed my life. It changed my relationship with my kids, changed my relationship with my wife, changed my relationship at work for the better. Once you understand that you are fully responsible for everything that you're experiencing, it means that you can change it. Now, what do most people do? They don't take responsibility. Has anybody ever complained? Anybody ever complained?
Just before we started the video.
Well, when you complain, you only complain about things that you have control over, or something you can do different, or a different way that you can approach things. Like, oh, there was an earthquake. Well, you know what? You don't have to live in Southern California. There's this. There's all these kind of problems that are going on. You have control on how you're going to respond to those things. So we're going to be talking about this right now. And taking 100% responsibility. So I have here a little formula. I do like formulas. E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcomes. So out of these 3 things, what do you have control over? And I'd like to turn this over to the panel. Oh. Anybody say, what do people focus on? What do you have control over? What do you have control over?
You have control over your response.
You have control over your response. What people focus on is the event. They blame the event. Oh, gosh, traffic. I was late because of traffic. Oh, this weather's horrible. Oh, whatever it is, they blame the event. But successful people focus on their responses. How are you going to respond to that event? There are only 3 responses you have any control over. It's your thoughts, images, and behavior. Let me see here. And here's one of my favorite quotes, and it's from Aristotle. I'll move my people over here. And what it says is, and the reason I did this one, wow, I'm having a little difficulty with my screen share. Excellence is an art won by training and habituation. We do not act rightly because we have virtue or excellence, but we rather have those because we've acted rightly. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. I have had the last part of this quote, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit, on my board for 20 years. And then I finally got the rest of the quote, and I actually think the beginning of the quote is much more powerful. Excellence is an art won by training and habituation. You can train yourself to respond better to things. And you develop habits around. This is a habit that you can do. And I'll give you an example here. When my wife and I, before we would go to bed, we would watch 2 episodes of Law and Order Special Victims Unit right before bed. And this was one of the images that I had in my head right before I went to bed. Now, this is something we probably spoken to you about before, but that last half hour before you go to bed is really important time for your subconscious. You're really telling your subconscious what's important to you. Well, when you watch 2 hours of Special Victims Units and then go to bed, you sometimes have nightmares, because that's what was happening to me. I was visioning people breaking in to our house and trying to hurt us. And that did not make for a restful night's sleep. Let's just say that is not an effective strategy. Instead, and Matthew reminded me of this, is what do you do instead? What do you do instead for that last half hour? How do you control those images, those thoughts that you have in your behaviors? Well, I changed my habit to, one, not watch, Law and Order Special Victims Unit. I'm not picking on that show. It's a fine show. Just don't watch it the 2 hours before bed. Is instead I do my affirmations and I do my visualization. So recently I had a show at the Irvine Improv, and I visualized that show in my head for the 2 weeks before it. I visualized walking out on stage. I visualized the crowd going, ah. I visualized, my drop the mic moment. I visualized the whole thing. I had that image in my head. And then when I went to bed, my subconscious gets to think on that and say, how do I create that? That is a really powerful way to deal with things. And I have to tell you, at the Irvine Improv, and Joyce and Joanna were there, when I came out on stage, that was the single best entrance I've ever had in my life. I was like, everybody's like, I'm like, oh, that was good stuff. Everybody should have that moment. Everybody should have a moment where they're greeted like that. All right.
Can I add how you took 100% responsibility for that in some way? You invited a lot of people that would love to see you, and the crowd got into it quickly too, but it was because the handful of people that you had, we were enthusiastic, and it was contagious, and it was a great show leading up to your act as well. And you were the headliner. You're so modest to not mention that, but you took responsibility for that outcome because you helped create the response to the event. So I just had to throw that in because you did have something to do with that.
Thank you. I will take credit for that. Yes, I promoted that show shamelessly. I freely admit that I did that, and there's about 200 people there. I probably had 45 people that were on Team Chris. And I like to think I delivered, but I will leave that up to the people who were there.
Oh, you absolutely did. You absolutely did.
I think I sent Chris a message. I said, I'm going to have rock star ads if I keep going to his shows because I was laughing so hard.
I'll take it. All right. So thank you for that. But yes, take responsibility for your wins and things that aren't going quite the way that you want. All right. Let's move on from Aristotle to Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn. Great quote from Jim Rohn. You must take personal responsibility. You cannot change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind, but you can change yourself. That is something that you're in charge of. And if you ever heard Jim Rohn speak, there's a talk on Success Talks. He is fantastic. William Shakespeare. Men at some times are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. So, very eloquent way of saying, look, it's not we're the master of our fate. We're in charge of how we respond. Why we're underlings is our fault. We are responsible for that. He is that good for making excuses is seldom good for anything else. Benjamin Franklin. When you make excuses, you choose to make excuses or not to make excuses. 99% of the failures come from people who have a habit of making excuses. Develop better habits. And Oprah. Be thankful for what you have. You'll end up having more. If you concentrate on what you don't have, you will never, ever have enough. You can decide to focus on what you want or what you have. And if you focus on what you don't have, you have control over that. And there's a reason why I chose all these different quotes here. I chose one from ancient Greece because what was true then is true now. Shakespeare, Jim Rohn, and Oprah, and I also had it with George Washington Carver. Race, religion, creed, time. What we're teaching you are universal truths. They were true 3,000 years ago. They're true now. And you have the ability to take control of your life and make a difference. Celebrate your successes. I had a great show. If I didn't have a good show, I'm not going to blame the crowd, which is often common. Oh, the crowd was just awful. It's my job to make people laugh. If I didn't make people laugh, I could have done a better job. I look at it that way. So take responsibility for the things that you're seeing in your life. So what are we going to do instead? Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to challenge you to write down 3 things that you appreciate, admire, or are thankful for. And we want you to genuinely appreciate 3 people today, verbally, not in your head, verbally say that. You know what I appreciate about you, Joyce? You always have a wonderful smile. You're always showing up on time. It's fantastic. Joanna, you've been working with me for what is now a year and a half. I am so thankful and grateful that you actually spent an extra day to come see my stand-up comedy show. Matthew, I just love your hair. It's just true. I'm obsessed. I can't help it. I just look at you and I go all gooey inside. No, but Matthew has been one of these people. I met him 2 years ago and we became instantaneous friends, and I appreciate that friendship. Genuinely appreciate people verbally. So many people go, oh, I think how wonderful people are, and they never share it. Share it with people. And then we're going to challenge you to do this even further. Genuinely appreciate 3 people a day for a full month and see what that does for yourself. When you do that, it will change your life. You will become more focused on what you appreciate. And when you do that, you'll notice more things to appreciate. You have control over that. So these are some of the things that we want you to do. Don't blame the event, time, whatever it is. Focus on what could I have done better? How could I have shown up better? What could I have done better in this situation? That's what we want you to focus on. That's the strategy. That's the lesson from taking 100% responsibility. So I'm going to open it up to the panel. And I'm going to change it to speaker view. Who would like to be the first speaker today?
I'll be the speaker. Go ahead, Joyce.
Excited. Matthew's excited. Let's get him talking. Speaker view. All right, Matt.
You got it. Well, one thing with that Oprah quote, Chris, I've seen that before, but it made me appreciate my children. So anyone who has children, it is such an example of, my daughter's got a room full of toys, but she's unhappy because she doesn't have that thing at Target we saw for $3. And it's hard to get that across to a child, but it's a good reminder for me that, like she said, if you focus on what you don't have, you can never be happy, because there's always something you can want. There's always something more, and that's fine. And it's good to work towards that stuff. But you need to have, like Chris is bringing up, we need to have the appreciation for what we have now, and then more of that comes into. It's kind of a weird concept, because I know a lot of people like to focus on what they want, but when you're doing that, you're actually focusing on your lack, and you're bringing into you more lack, and you're focusing on lack. Even though you think you're focusing on what you want, you're more focusing on not having it versus getting it. So that was a great quote that I'm glad you brought up, because it's a good mind shift, because I think a lot of people will focus on the lack of it instead of the want of it and the appreciation for what they have.
All right. Thank you, Matthew.
You're welcome. You're welcome, guys.
Joyce, you're up.
I'm up. So one of the things that came to my mind is, in my 25 plus years of HR experience, what I used to always tell everybody is you're responsible for 3 things. And you kind of hit it exactly. For me, at work, in the work environment, it's you're responsible for your attendance, your performance, and your behavior. You have control over those 3 things. It's the exact same thing. You are 100% responsible for showing up, for how you respond to things. You have when something happens to you, you have the ability to sit back and go, okay, I can fly off the handle and scream and yell at somebody, or I can try to think of why this happened and put myself and show up differently in the response, which will ultimately have a different outcome, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that it's so important. It's this is one of my favorite principles that we talk about, because that is what we have control over. We can control ourselves, our response, our interaction with every single human being. And then the second thing that I wanted to touch on is the appreciation thing. I know when I go out of my way, not only do I get to speak and leave a little something for somebody else in making them feel better, because when you say something to somebody that, you know, when you give an appreciation, you see that change on that person's face immediately. But then I feel better too. So there's a win-win in taking the time to verbalize the appreciation of somebody.
Oh, great, Joyce.
Yep. Oh yeah. Thank you so much, Joyce. Appreciate it. All right, Joanna.
So I've heard this formula called the law of life, and I think that's so true, because it can go down to the most minuscule example of my mom baked my favorite pie and brought it over to my house. But my goal for the month was to eat no sugar. So I had a choice. The event was amazing. You know, the event was what it was, but my choice was the response, all the way to something extremely catastrophic. You know, friends that are going through major health crisis, financial crisis, my response can have, you know, an effect on how the outcome comes out. If I can be positive and encouraging and help them find resources to solve the problem, or if I can just sit there in the pity party with them and go, yeah, it's terrible, I'm sorry this happened. It doesn't matter if it's as simple as our own personal choices of what goes in our mouth for the day versus what comes out of our mouth and how it influences others. And to me, this formula is the law of life. It affects everything we do. Even, I mean, I challenge you to look at even just the most simplest tasks in the day and evaluate your response to the events and see how it changes. I could have been annoyed by the donkey outside my window that was making so much noise, but instead my response was, Chris, when you were off screen, show you guys what's going on here. And I think we all got some enjoyment out of that versus me being irritated of our time being interrupted. So it's the law of life. It applies in every situation. So thank you for sharing that with us today, Chris.
I really like that law of life. I'm going to adopt that one. Thanks, Joanna.
All right. I'll end. Oh, did you have something you want to say, Matt?
Yeah, the only thing I don't think I heard you say it, but what I like about the responsibility is when you do blame and complain, you're saying that somebody else is responsible for your outcomes, and what happens is you become a victim. And nobody wants to live in that victim mentality, because then it's always, oh, poor me, I have nothing to do. I mean, everything we're talking about is you are the creator of your path. Take power of it. Take your superpower, your power of choice. And when you decide to take the responsibility, even for the bad things, like you said, Chris, your relationships are better, because now you're saying, I can change it. I'm in control of this, right? Like you said with your wife, if you guys are fighting, I'm going to take it over because I don't want to fight anymore. I want to get us back to good, or a relationship with a coworker or something, instead of waiting for them to show up with chocolates, which I do like chocolates. You'll get back on my good side with chocolates and donuts.
Good to know. And Matt, thank you for sharing that. That whole idea of victim versus a victor is a really important concept here. And it's one that you really want to own. When you blame, complain, make excuses, you're saying, I'm not in control. And when you realize that you have that moment where you go, well, look, I don't have to blame. I don't have to complain. What can I do differently? So I'll share just a last story here to kind of wrap this up. Oh boy, I guess it was almost 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And it was pretty darn awful. And I remember I was in New York City. I was going to audition. It was the winter. It was really cold. And I was down to 145 pounds, and I'm 6'2". So I was thin, gone. I looked gray, not a good kind of gray, like this kind of gray. I was like, my skin was gray. And I remember I stepped off the curb in New York, and it was a little slippery, and I almost collapsed into the street. And it was a really awful time. I lost almost a year of my life, and I was in bed. And I remember, you're depressed. I'm like, I'm not freaking depressed. I feel like crap, and that's why I'm not getting like. And they gave me like medications, like they gave me Zoloft or whatever, one of those psychotropic drugs that are supposed to make me happy. And I took that, and I knew immediately it was not for me. And I said, and I went to the doctor, and I went to the specialist in chronic fatigue. And I remember him saying to me, Chris, you're going to have this for the rest of your life. And I went, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. And what I did was I adopted a very, very strict diet. And I went to a connective tissue therapist, and I went to an acupuncturist. And I did all these alternative things, but I took control. What do I have control of? I have control of the food I'm putting in my mouth. I have control over what doctors I'm going to see. But what somebody else believes about you does not have to be your reality. And I've met people since then who've had chronic fatigue syndrome, and they go, there's nothing to do with it. And it was chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, whatever those weird things are. Basically, I think what it was is I was stressed. I was stressed out, and this was my body's reaction to it. And it just said, look, if you're not going to slow down, I'm going to slow you down. And I took control over that. I took responsibility. Look, I made the decisions at this point. I was up late doing stand-up comedy and acting in the city. I was working out way too hard, and I was eating a horrible diet. I was putting horrible, horrible stress on my body. And it just said, I've had enough. And that's what it was. It took me a year to recover from that. But I'll tell you what, I hit the low point. I was responsible for the behaviors that got me there, and I was responsible for the behaviors that got me out. So whatever it is that you're facing that you say, oh, but that doesn't apply to me, I will tell you right now, you can make a difference in your life no matter what it is. Any final thoughts?
Definitely reach out to your coach if you feel like you want to discuss this more. As we're going through this, I have a talk coming up next week, guys, and I'm like, I could do it all on responsibility. I'm like, we could do a full day workshop on this. I think that the idea of this is so big. So let it sink in for now, but reach out again, talk about it. This is, like Chris said, this is one that will just change things right off the bat. It's a mindset shift that just changes. So if you need to reach out, talk about it more, please do.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I'll tell you, the first time I heard this, it was like somebody slapped me in the face and went, whoosh, and I'm like, oh, I am responsible. And I hope this is a metaphorical slap in your face. Take 100% responsibility. It will literally change your life. We appreciate your time with us. We appreciate that you've chosen us to work with, and we look forward to obviously working with you one-on-one and getting back to you in the next video. Thank you so much, everyone.